Elliott and Tony at breakfast.
BBC Hereford and Worcester.
Coming up then after the news, finally listen to the Worcester woman with contaminated blood from the NHS who feels MPs are taking the problem seriously at last. A Worcester woman who received contaminated blood from the NHS says she finally feels like MPs are taking her seriously for the first time after a parliamentary debate into the matter yesterday. Colette Wintle was one of thousands of people who contracted illnesses such as hepatitis and even HIV after being treated for haemophilia. Yesterday's debate was over whether or not to hold a public inquiry into this mistake, and Colette joins us in the studio now. Morning, Colette.
Good morning.
Just briefly remind us of the background and your story.
Yes, well, my story is that I was born with the condition of haemophilia, but I'm also symptomatic, which is fairly unusual. Nevertheless, during the 1970s, a time when Britain should have been self-sufficient in blood products, but unfortunately failed to do so despite Lord David Owen, who was then Health Minister's efforts. And I think he was quite shocked in the subsequent years after he left office to discover that the implementation of self-sufficiency had not taken place. As a result, particularly the haemophilia community, who are very reliant on clotting products, were infected with hepatitis B, hepatitis C, AIDS, and then laterally in the 90s, new variant CJD exposure. So my story is that I effectively, my life has been since the age of 17 years of age, which is when I was first exposed to these contaminants, has been totally compromised. But even worse for the community infected, over 2,000 have lost their lives because of this. And this is something that the state caused, and the NHS.
Yeah. So this has had a big impact on your life then?
A massive impact. Obviously very angry about it, and have channelled that anger into campaigning and lobbying ministers, Department of Health ministers, MPs, successive governments over the last 20 years.
So what was the main aim of the debate yesterday? What are you trying to get them to do, and what have you been trying to get them to do for a while?
Well, what we've been asking for a long time is for a public inquiry, and that is something that has been resisted for many years, quite deliberately, because there's such a body of evidence that points to medical negligence on the part of the government and the NHS. So the MPs who spoke in the House yesterday very movingly about their constituents and the harrowing ordeals that they've had to experience and suffer as a result of this, is to not waste any more time. We've had enough prevarication over the years. We've had too many people lose their lives, too many people having to travel up and down to Westminster fighting for justice. So the whole point of yesterday was to actually hear from individuals cross-party who have all spoken, and I have to say for the first time, considering past rhetoric, it's the first time ever I have heard MPs speak about accountability. It has never been said before. So now we have a whole body of MPs saying to the Minister and directing it to the Prime Minister, we have caused the problem. Collectively, governments over the past have resisted giving these people justice. We cannot continue to do this anymore. If we can deal with the Bloody Sunday issues, we can deal with Hillsborough. We cannot turn our back on this body of people. We have to deal with it, and deal with it now.
So that sounds very promising. That must fill you with some confidence then.
Yes, it does, for the first time, dare I say it, ever. And I hope that I won't have to come back here and tell you on yet another occasion that they have wasted another opportunity to do exactly what they are talking about doing, and that is to deal with an upfront compensation package, provide health care which people are not getting access to, fast track them and remove them from the indignities of being reassessed year in, year out for their right to a meagre amount of benefit, because through no fault of their own, they are unable to work.
So what's likely to happen? What's the next step in the timescale on getting a resolution? Because politics does move very slowly, doesn't it?
Oh boy, does it, yes. And actually, to that end, I can say that David Cameron has to be held to account on this too. He promised his own constituents 6 months ago. Yes, he promised him that by the end of last year there would be a solution. He promised the wider community. He's failed to deliver that. He cannot, if he's facing an election very soon, if he wants to keep his credibility, if he wants people to have confidence in him and what he says, he is going to have to come up with something. I think really what really needs to happen, and it's not a matter of lack of political will, that was evident yesterday in the House. There are a lot of cross-party MPs shouting, bring justice to these people. So we simply need ministers to come together. We don't need civil servants who've been directing them so far. And it was quite obvious Jane Ellison yesterday was reading from a prepared statement written by civil servants.
So you need action now. It needs to happen.
It's just simply action. Yeah. And that's not difficult to do, because let's be honest about it. If there was another war tomorrow, and God forbid there was, they would find the money for that. They would find the money for all sorts of things. Okay. But they've resisted doing it for this, and it has to happen.
It certainly sounds very promising, and hopefully next time we speak to you there'll be a resolution and it'll all be sorted.
I very much hope so, Elliott, and thank you very much for following my story and allowing me to speak about this. It's very important.
Colette, lovely to speak to you. Colette Wintle, who was, of course, given contaminated blood by the NHS, and we will watch that story.